In Music Industry Studies folder called Assignment 1, you'll see a PDF 3. If you open that, it will give you the second part of Assignment 1. Remember, each part, there are 5 parts in total to Assignment 1. Each part must be a minimum of 200 words. So if you see about a third of the way down the page, it says outline. Outline means write a brief, very brief account, not an essay or a novel, but don't write 1 or 2 lines either. Outline the 8 fundamental components, in other words, the 8 parts of the Irish music industry structure. Now there's a second part of that question, and the second part is identify how these 8 fundamental parts of the Irish music industry compare or differ from the international music industry. And that's something you'll mainly have to look up yourselves, because as I said, a lot of this work is self-directed work. You're at a QQI level 5, self-directed. In other words, you do a lot of the work yourself. So the first part of the 8 fundamental, in other words, the basic necessary fundamental components of the Irish music industry is the songwriter or composer themselves. Songwriter, composer, they're interchangeable words. They mean the same thing. A composer might refer to somebody who's composing music for a movie or an advertisement or a series or anything that requires maybe theme music, like a podcast intro. A songwriter is somebody who might write lyrics or chord progressions. The second thing that's required for the Irish music industry is the artists themselves. Of course, an artist and a songwriter or composer can be 2 different things. An artist may not necessarily be the songwriter. So you know any amount of artists in Ireland. No artist, no music industry. And then the next fundamental component of the Irish music industry, of course, are the record labels. In Ireland, you don't have any major record labels. What you have are subdivisions, wings, a wing of a major record company. For example, you have Universal Ireland, and Universal Ireland would have some bands and some artists signed to them. For example, in Ireland, the Blizzards from Mullingar were signed to Universal Records, and bands like Riptide Movement from Dublin are signed to Universal Ireland, and there was a guy in the 90s who was signed to another label called Sony. So you'd have Universal Ireland, Sony Ireland, and they would be what's known as subsidiaries or wings of major global record labels. The next and fourth component of the Irish music industry, fundamental component, is the music publisher, and we discussed that already. A music publisher is somebody who sells an artist's music or tries to promote the artist's music to get somebody to record it or somebody to play that music, say in an advertisement or in a movie, or to get a bigger artist to sing their music. For example, a publisher would have represented the Dublin artist who wrote that song Angels for Robbie Williams. That was actually written by a young Dublin guy. So the publisher would have went to Robbie Williams' record company and given Robbie Williams' record company that song Angels, that one, I'm Loving Angels instead. So the next fundamental component of the Irish music industry is the Performing Rights Organisation. Now you see in brackets there IMRO, it's called IMRO, and they're a famous, well-known organisation in this country, Irish Music Rights Organisation. So IMRO stands for Irish Music Rights Organisation, and what they do is they're responsible for collecting money for artists. What kind of money? Well, an artist will get royalty payments. If an artist writes an original piece of music and that original piece of music is played on the radio, every time it's played on the radio, the artist gets a payment. Who collects that money? IMRO, the Irish Music Rights Organisation, collects that money and distributes it to the artists. So when you sign up with IMRO, the likes of myself and Noah, who would be original recording artists, we're signed up with IMRO and we get royalty payments from IMRO for our original music. Second thing IMRO does is collects live performing rights. So a band that's performing, say, 100 gigs a year will get a payment from IMRO. They would register all those live performances. And then it mentions other international performing rights organizations, namely called ASCAP, and which are the American equivalent of IMRO. They're huge, and BMI and PRS, the Performing Rights Society in the UK. These all do the same thing. They collect royalties and they collect payments for artists. Then you go to number 6, just another collection performance agency, PPI, Performance License. You can write a bit about that. Being very honest, I've never had to deal with them or never come across them. Now you get to number 7, which is, when you hear mechanical licenses, mechanical refers to a physical object. It's not so applicable now because people don't really sell physical objects of music anymore. You stream most of it. You don't buy CDs, you don't buy vinyl, and you don't buy cassettes. You might say, well, some people buy vinyl. They do. Collectors and enthusiasts might buy a bit of vinyl. But aside from that, nobody buys physical music products anymore. So that's why the mechanical MCPS, Mechanical Copyright Protection Society Ireland, existed. Now this was all written in 2013, which is 11 years ago as we speak. It's now December 2024. That's a huge time in the music industry because technology has changed everything so much. In other words, the internet has taken over almost everything. And the last thing, number 8, the 8th fundamental component of the Irish music industry, is an organisation called RAAP, which does the same thing as any performing rights society as IMRO, Irish Music Rights Organisation. It protects artists and collects royalties and payments for artists who may have performed live. Some of that is repetition. Some organisations do the same thing. Do a little bit of research on all of that. Quote your sources. If you come across a statement that you're copy and pasting direct, make sure you provide the URL, Universal Resource Link, in other words, the internet web page address. Just copy and paste it and provide it under and say, according to blah, 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 and then you'll state what they say.